These are AR glasses. They've got micro OLED displays above my eyes being reflected and overlaid onto the real world. They're extremely cool, surprisingly well built, and I spent a lot of time and even software development effort trying to fit these into my workflow, but they're just not for me. We're going to start by learning about the glasses themselves, and then we'll get to my experience with them. You can check the chapters below. My expectation when I ordered these was mainly to use them at college, actually, or any other situation where I would want to use my laptop not at home. Since I thought, well, maybe I'd be able to get multiple displays or at least one bigger display while I'm out. That could also save some battery life on my laptop because I could have its screen be off, and I guess that would be a bit more private too. And yeah, just a bit to feel cool. And when they arrived, I really did think that they would be the future. The displays, the quality, they feel exceptional. This is my first time seeing micro OLED in a product, and it's hard to describe what nicer colors feels like, but my background is purple, and it felt like I was seeing that background not with an inaccurate purple or a wrong purple, but just a different one, a new one, a deeper one. And that's probably the least precise but most real way that I can try and express it. And obviously that doesn't mean they can't be improved. It would be nicer for them to be 1440p or even 4K, but 1080p is surprisingly good here, and I imagine that's due to a lack of a screen door effect. Like, there are no gaps between the pixels, so 1080p is just less of an issue here. Especially when it's running at 120Hz, which they do on the latest firmware when plugged into a computer or your phone if it's just display mirroring, but not when connected to the official app, which we'll talk about later. And I guess while we're on the topic, we should probably also talk about FOV, since even though it's not directly related to the displays, it's more optics around them, it's pretty similar, so we should just get to it. And my judgment is that it's fine. It's big enough that looking right into the edges of your virtual monitor is a little bit uncomfortable, so it's perfectly good for one static big display, but really not too much more than that, since actually as far as how much of my vision is taken up by it, it's not really any more than just being close to my monitor on my desk. But if you actually think about it, how much more of your vision is taken up by a cinema screen compared to holding your phone close to you? Like, it is more comfortable in these. It feels like a big display that's far away, not a close-up display that's small. Even though if you actually think about it, it's a super tiny display that's super close. The built-in speakers and microphones are actually pretty decent. I mean, they're not the best, and the above-ear speakers are, as all above-ear speakers are, which is to say, not super bassy, but they get loud enough, and they won't distract people around you if you're listening at a reasonable volume and they're not right up next to your ear. For the time that I did use these at college, I was happily listening to music through them rather than my earphones. Even if they did sound worse, it was just more convenient, and people around me were happily existing none the wiser. Until they looked at me, because it's not the fault of the bulk, it's not really even the fault of the design. No one at first glance noticed these little lumps on the top of the glasses where the displays are kept, and most people somehow actually didn't even see the two lens thing that's going on. It's the fact that when you have these on, you can see a glowing rectangle of like shapes and colors, which is actually just the other person seeing a tiny version of the screen that you're looking at. I'll actually take a sec to put them on so you can better see what I'm getting at. You can see, probably if I get up close, exactly what I can see, which right now is a video feed of me. And that is furthered by the fact that it looks like I'm wearing sunglasses indoors, so I'm inviting a bit of scrutiny when people go, what's going on? Wait, what's going on in his eyes? Wait, why are there two lenses? Wait, what's the deal with the lumps? So if someone's only looking at you for a split second and your brightness is down, I'll turn it down, it should be less noticeable for you now, you might get away with it, but it's not like you could be wearing these and just nobody knows that anything's going on. Which, if these had cameras on, I would want people to know about them. But if it's just displays, the deal was kind of supposed to be that these are at least somewhat discreet, and they're not particularly. But yeah, I hadn't even considered that if you don't have long hair, you've got no chance of being particularly discreet because you have a cable running down the left side of your neck. Let's focus for a second on that cable I mentioned. It's USB-C, which is really nice to see, and detachable from the glasses, so you should be able to replace it with other cables as long as it's not a really low quality cable that's missing some of the pins. It does need to be a proper good cable. However, as I somewhat alluded to earlier, you probably won't be able to get away with just any USB-C cable because it's angled coming out of the glasses, so you'll look especially weird if you don't have long hair and you just have a straight USB cable sticking out of the side of your head. The main interesting part about this cable, though, is what goes down it. When you think of video going over USB, you might think of what goes on with the Oculus Quest, where the Quest has a processor, the computer has a processor, and to get video from the computer to the Quest, it takes the raw frames, encodes them, compresses them, sends them over just regular USB data, and the Quest has the processing power to decompress, decode, show them. However, these glasses don't have the power profile or the space for a processor, so they don't do that. They use DisplayPort Alt Mode, which, if you're unfamiliar with DisplayPort, it's basically just HDMI but nicer. Basically, instead of spending a bunch of processor time encoding things into some weird format and getting them back and losing quality in that process, this just sends full raw video over the pins of a USB-C cable, which is great, and it's a standard, that's not a special X-Rail thing. It's just that your desktop computer probably doesn't support it, though some do. Your laptop maybe will, and your phone maybe will. Manufacturers aren't very forthcoming about the exact capabilities of their USB ports, and some parts, like DisplayPort Alt Mode, are optional. So, for example, it works on my laptop, it doesn't work on someone else's laptop I've tried plugging them into. It works on my phone, it won't work on most Pixels, except newer ones now support it. It's really awkward using this, but it's also kind of necessary for the form factor, and has the benefits of, well, it's raw video. Unlike a Quest or anything else where there's video compression, where there's blocking and artifacting and latency, there's basically no overhead, basically no latency, and the video feed, as I said before when evaluating the displays, looks great. Just before you consider buying these, if you end up thinking about it after this video, remember to check online if people are having success with the configuration you're planning on using, or make sure wherever you're buying them from has a good returns policy. But for now, let's not worry about whether it works. If it does work, because it does for me, how well does it work? What can you actually do? Well, if you have a Mac or Windows PC, there's a piece of software called Nebula, which lets you place a virtual monitor. Rather than being attached to your face and following where you look, you can place it in the real world relative to where you look, and if you look away, it will go away. It's a bit more natural. It's kind of a flawed concept in my mind, because it's much more natural that way, but it also further shrinks the amount of display you can really have, because the FOV is already kind of small, but just about enough. But now, unless you keep your head perfectly still, you're going to have to allow a little bit of extra room so that when you move your head around, you're not cutting off parts of the display. But that aside, that's a pretty useful piece of software, and one I will try to clone for Linux, which we'll get to later. But they also have Nebula for Android, which isn't quite the same. It doesn't offer you head-tracked display things, but you can still mirror the display just fine. And there's the X-Real AR Space, which is an AR environment. It's 3D, it actually looks pretty good. It's kind of nice. You can still see the real world through the edges, and you actually control it kind of like using a Wii remote. You use your phone's gyroscope, and it's like the touchscreen as a trackpad, which isn't the worst method of navigation, given they don't have eye tracking. However, the movement drifts a lot. It's not very consistent. You have to think about where you're pointing your phone to use things, and it's just not very intuitive, I've found. But also, there's just not a lot to do in it. If I were to be wearing these glasses 24/7, I can see viewing pictures in them being kind of useful. But I'm never, ever going to, without these glasses on, because in the end, I found it kind of socially unacceptable, and just kind of awkward still, even if I'm alone, to have them on all the time. I'm never going to not have those on and think, oh, I want to view a picture. I'm going to put those on, wait for AR Space to load, and use their kind of awkward image viewer to view an image. I'm never going to do that. Yet the Nebula for Android app needs constant access to your images, even if you don't want it. They won't let you go into the AR space without that permission. Another thing that contributes to me not finding the AR space very useful is that the web browser is very slow. Navigating to websites is kind of fine, and I don't have the newest phone, but it's from 2021. It's got a Snapdragon 888 in it. If I go to try and watch a YouTube video, and they have recommended YouTube videos on the front of AR space, it's too laggy to watch. It cannot do any resolution I tried at 30 frames per second. Beyond the AR space, the app also lets you take the regular stuck-to-your-face screen mirroring that you can get without the app, and the app lets you move that to the side a bit, which sounds like a really good idea. It feels like that should be like when you get a video call in Cyberpunk. You could just have someone in the corner of your eye or something in the corner of your eye. It sounds great. But again, the FOV means it's not really in the corner of your vision. It's just the center of your vision, but a bit off. It's still very distracting and would still very much get in your way. And the final reason I would never use these connected to my phone is that phones aren't 16:9 anymore, but the displays in the glasses are. So unless you use something like Samsung DeX, which in fairness you can do, and I've tried and that works, unless your phone has something like that, it's just going to be mirroring the phone display in the exact same aspect ratio, which means you're not going to have black bars, because black for these displays means transparent, but you're gonna have your image shrunken by the fact that this 18:9 image has to be squished onto a 16:9 display, which gives you transparent bars at the edges of your content, which is noticeable because it makes it smaller. Not a reason that I'd avoid this app, but also just another little awkward bit is the Nebula for Android app needs Google services, and I have at least the basic Google services still on my phone, but the version from the Play Store doesn't work since I don't have Google services. And Nebula or Xreal has a Google Drive link on their support forums from which you can download a de-Googled version of the app, which is a kind of interesting way of doing things, and I'm happy that that solution exists. I'm happy I could use the app as opposed to not using it. I just don't really get what the point is. Fine, you don't find them very useful when connected to a phone. But what about when they're plugged into a laptop, which was the whole main initial point? Well, I can't complain too much that Xreal doesn't have Linux support, because I understand it's a smaller market. I have no idea if Xreal is a relatively new company, but these AR glasses are the first products I'm hearing from them, so maybe they're at least a relatively small company. I can see why Linux wouldn't be a focus, but I do wish there was at least an official Linux SDK, even if there was no official Nebula for Linux or something along those lines. But we'll get to how that integrates with what I end up making later, because the first thing that I was planning on using to try and get virtual desktops with those on Linux actually does use the community drivers as a base, but it's something called Breezy Desktop. It has changed quite a lot since I initially looked at all of this in April, because originally it was pretty much Steam Deck only. Technically you could use it on desktop Linux too, but its main capability was getting one Vulkan app and putting that in front of you doing virtual desktop head tracking things, not really a whole desktop, just one program, ideally a game. However, since then, changes have been made, and the developer clearly has been working on getting GNOME virtual desktops, and that's great. This seems like it could be good software. However, I'm not super interested in it. Partially because I just don't use GNOME, and I wouldn't have much use for just showing a single program. I don't plan on gaming in them much. But secondly, I won't exaggerate it. It's not like it's super, super bad. I completely get that the developer is trying to make money off it and is doing it by making great software. However, there is DRM, Google Analytics, and it runs as root. So I'm not super comfortable having it run on my machine, especially after whatever it does caused connectivity issues between my glasses and my laptop until I reinstalled Linux, even after I stopped their driver from running. And I found a GitHub issue mentioning something like that, except when they closed the driver, it went away. So I'm not really sure what that's about. So yeah, I had some issues with it, both ideologically and when actually trying it. However, I will still put a link in the description, since if you're a Steam Deck user, I don't want to discourage you from trying it if you're okay with the telemetry stuff, because if it's good software, it's good software. The only real way to go from there was to write my own software, so that's exactly what I did. Luckily, the hard parts, getting the data out of the gyroscopes in these glasses, was already done by Tobias Frischk on GitLab, which I really appreciate him doing and making open source and being respective and fixing the issue that I made regarding really high CPU usage. It's excellent, and if you're planning on doing anything with these glasses, I highly recommend it. But yeah, he had already made that, so my job was only really to do the visualization, to put a virtual monitor in an environment and have a camera that moves in relation to how your head actually moves. During that, I ended up making a members-only and Patreon-only video, which was just me rambling for 50 minutes about the state of things as of the 12th of April, but I will give you a general rundown right now. It started with me wanting to use Godot, because I thought, well, it's a game engine, it should provide me the ability to render things, and then all I would need to do is somehow get the data out of the driver and have a script in Godot that is just constantly matching the camera's rotations to the rotations provided by the glasses driver. However, I couldn't find a reasonable way to get screen capture working in Godot, and the only game engine I could find that would allow me to get video into it reasonably, even if unofficially, was the Unreal Engine, where I found a GStreamer plugin that wasn't made for Unreal Engine 5, but I ended up getting working for Unreal Engine 5 and Linux. So my plan was use a Python script to get Pipewire desktop capture going, and GStreamer within Python sending the video frames to shared memory. Then the Unreal program could use its GStreamer plugin to get those frames from shared memory and put them onto a texture. Saying things like that makes it sound so easy, but as someone who was both unfamiliar with the engine and C++ and the glasses and everything, that was days of work, and it was really awkward. The way I was getting the outputs of the driver into Unreal was not rewriting it in C++ and making it an actual Unreal plugin or anything smart. It was a Python script that was reading the standard output of the driver and saving that shared memory again and Unreal accessing that. The problem is that the Python script to do that was very, very slow, like unreasonably slow. I know it's Python, but I cannot explain why it was so slow. Luckily, C, basic file management, reading and writing is not too hard, so I just went into the driver's source code and did it there directly, and then things were going great, and I managed to get a cube moving, and then I turned that into head movement, and Unreal succeeded. The only problem was it was a heavy program. It wouldn't run at all on my laptop's integrated GPU, though that's probably more Vulkan driver issues than actual difficulty to run it. And on my laptop's GTX 1060, it used about a third of it. My laptop was using like 40 watts of power just to be idle with the glasses display rendering. So after all of that, I did a rewrite in just C++ using Raylib as my rendering manager, so I didn't have to use OpenGL or Vulkan directly. And that made things light enough that on my integrated GPU, it ran better than it did on my dedicated GPU before, keeping in mind also this works on the integrated GPU where Unreal didn't. But also, it just made things just much smaller. You know, it's a few megabytes instead of this big Unreal project. And I think that my side of it was actually pretty successful. The only problem is I had issues with Pipewire desktop capture, and I was just never happy completely with getting all of those issues solved, along with the general social awkwardness of using those publicly. So I ended up leaving it there. Though it's still on GitLab, and I'll leave it in the description if you want to take it further. Oh, and side note, if you're wondering why I didn't just use OpenXR, because you might have noticed these are supported in Monado, why not just use that for head movement? I just thought that Monado seems like a pretty heavy and large dependency for something that isn't really VR, but I did bother trying Monado, both with Unreal and separately, so I should have video footage of me trying the XR Gears demo with them. It's actually pretty cool, even if you wouldn't want to use them for VR. I have glossed over so many things, like thousands of words worth of notes, that are just small details. They don't really impact my conclusion much, which is why I've been willing to leave them out, but it really has been a very interesting time just trying to figure out the value proposition of these and trying to do my little software development to see if I could make them work for me. And I'm going to be honest, originally I was planning on waiting and waiting and waiting until potentially, be it some firmware updates on these that could somehow improve them, or client-side software development like an official Linux app maybe, or the third-party drivers for it getting better, or whatever it may be. I was originally planning on waiting until these would be how I imagined them to be. But I realized enough of the issues are in hardware, and enough of the issues are just that this really wasn't a worthwhile purchase for me, that I can sell these and recoup 90% of what I paid, and I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. They're very, very exciting and interesting technology, and it was great to see Micro OLED in person, and it has been really interesting to try them. I just don't think that they're worth it for me. Despite that, if you're a Steam Deck user, or if you're a Mac or Windows PC user that also doesn't mind the social aspect so much, and you just want a larger display, and you don't care so much about people seeing the glowing bits in your eyes, if I were to have these plugged in, I'll plug them in now. If you can get over those parts, and you're happy with not really AR, just, floating desktops, there's no head tracking, they are just 3 degrees of freedom, they definitely could be great. It's just that for me, the Android app offered nothing at all of value, and the DIY Linux route just didn't end up working. Luckily though, despite my time with these glasses not being particularly awesome, there's a group of people who I have to thank now who always are. A huge thanks to the supporters, Ducky, Russell Willis, PT1997, and Pytech. I really appreciate it. You can join them on Patreon if you'd like to. Hopefully you've enjoyed. And I'm off to sell these.